So I would like to give a brief introduction about Swamiji.
Really brief.
Yes, really brief. Rumapada Swamiji is a motivational speaker, Vedic scholar, and spiritual teacher. He shares a Bhakti Yoga with a wide range of audiences. He has been a guest speaker at Fortune 500 corporations and universities such as MIT, University of Illinois, Penn State, Northwestern University, Washington University in St. Louis, and University of South Florida, and several others. We are really fortunate to have him today at RIT. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for giving us your valuable time.
Hare Krishna.
Looks like a lot of families. How many of you are registered students at RIT? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Congratulations. And everyone else is just part of the community or something like that, yeah? Okay. Pursuit of happiness. It's a good topic because it's something that everybody wants. We'll say negative. There is not somebody that doesn't want happiness. Everyone wants happiness. Those of you from India, you don't know what this is, but everybody else knows what this is. This is Matrix. Oh, I haven't seen the movie, but I know what it's. Somebody asks a question, something, and then the person, this mystical person, holds out his hand with white gloves and says, "You want the red pill or the blue pill? You want reality or illusion?" Of course, they say, "I want reality. I don't want illusion. I want to know the answer to this question." So they get the reality pill. Here's the reality pill. But the reality pill starts with questions. Although we all want happiness, life seems to be, one that we wanted at least, difficult. I mean, little is okay, but life is difficult. Why? What's the root cause of suffering? Now the Vedas has an answer, and Buddhists have an answer. They don't have the same answer. Anybody here knows a little bit about Buddhism? A little bit? Okay, a few hands. This is a fill-in-the-blank question. The root cause of, from the teachings of Buddha, the root cause of suffering is, don't blurt it out, just raise your hand if you know the answer. The root cause of suffering is?
Maya.
No. The root cause of, but if this is a Buddhist, not a Christian guy. Root cause of suffering is? The root cause of suffering is? Desire. If you're a Buddhist, the root cause of suffering is desire. If you want to get free from suffering, get free from desire. If you want to get free from desire, what's the method? Two things. One, live a life of goodness, starting with compassion, non-violence, kindness to others, truthfulness, simplicity, etc., etc. The same as the qualities of the mode of goodness in Bhagavad Gita. Frame your life, the incubation chamber of goodness. Non-violence right at the top. Then, the other, when that chamber, what do? You engage in meditation in what? You meditate on being in the moment. You've heard the phrase? Or mindfulness. That buzz that's in the world today comes from Buddhism. And a little sharing, I'll get to the presentation, but because it's important to understand what happiness is and what it isn't. Why is there suffering? If the teaching is there's desire, you become free from desire, and here's the method. And the way to become free from desire is be in the moment, because there's a teaching that's a core teaching. There's different brands of Buddhism for sure, but a core teaching of Buddhism is all there is the moment, or consciousness is momentary. They have a nice phrase. It's a Sanskrit phrase. Kshanik Vijnanavad. Vad means doctrine. Vijnana, Prabhupada taught us it means realized knowledge. In Buddhism it means consciousness. And kshanik means the blink of an eye. Less than a moment. Kshanik Vijnanavad. Consciousness is just in the moment. So be in the moment, because the past is gone, the future isn't here. So just be in the moment, be in the moment, be in the moment, be in the moment, be in the moment. Those two things. Goodness, be in the moment. And when you get really good at it, at being in the moment, what comes next? You go on the other side of the moment. What's that? Nirvana. What's that? Enlightenment. Nirvana is a nice Sanskrit word. You've heard that word before? Nirvana. It's vocabulary building time. Nirvana means, near means not, and vana means forest. So you're out of the forest of material existence. Cessation of material existence. When you cease material existence, what's left? If you're Buddhist, nothing, or nothingness, or void, or voidism, shunyavad, from our pranam mantra to Prabhupada, because this is many people that are devotees. Nirvishesha shunyavadi. Shunya means zippo in Spanish. How's your Spanish? Nada. Nada means nothing. Nothing. Shunyavada. So, on the other side of the moment is nothingness. And that's it. Cessation of suffering is nothingness. Just go out of existence. Poof. Now, there's a different understanding that comes from the Vedas, because, as most of you know, Buddha rejected the Vedas for different reasons. But if you go to the Vedas, here's what the Vedas say. The root cause of suffering. Oh, but I'm ahead of myself. Root cause of suffering is not desire. Root cause of suffering, someone said it, lack of knowledge. Root cause of suffering is ignorance. Because from ignorance comes ignorant desire. From ignorant desire comes ignorant activity. From ignorant activity comes suffering. Karmic reaction due to ignorant activity caused by ignorant desire, which is caused by ignorance. So if you want to become free from suffering, remove ignorance. If there's in darkness, you turn on the light. And darkness is dispelled. Suffering is dispelled by awakening of transcendental knowledge, not just RIT knowledge, but transcendental knowledge. I mean, there's nothing wrong with RIT knowledge, but it's not the end of suffering. And transcendental knowledge is the end of suffering. It's the path, it's the road, it's the avenue to, so that's what we're going to spend some time to get to pursuit of happiness. How do I learn to be happy? So one of the first steps is distinguish reality from illusion. The reality pill and the illusion pill. So we're going to spend time with what's on the reality, what's on the illusion side, and then we're going to go to the reality side. A good definition of something, this is an education principle, a good definition of something is what that something is and what that something isn't. It's inclusive and exclusive simultaneously. And here's a nice example. Some of you have been around a while. So over here, there was some young people singing. Supposing I want to get one of those drums. So I asked somebody, hey, I heard you're going to India, can you get me a drum? I said, sure, what kind do you want? Well, it's called a mridanga. What's a mridanga? Well, it's a drum that has two ends. But they're not, two heads to the drum. They're not side by side like a bongo drum. They're on opposite ends of the same drum. Oh. And then one of the ends is bigger and the other end is smaller. Oh. But it's not made of wood, it's made of clay. So, because there are different drums that have two ends. So if you want to define something, somebody doesn't know what that, supposing somebody wants happiness. We all want happiness. You have to know what it isn't. And you also have to know what it is, because otherwise you can accept what isn't for what is. Distinguishing reality from illusion starts with, this is your answer, Maya. There she is. She's in charge of illusion. And she works through these three personalities pictured here. These are the controlling deities of the modes of nature. I'm going to be speaking about Bhagavad Gita, and I was told there'd be a Bhagavad Gita here. Is there a Bhagavad Gita here?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to mention Bhagavad Gita a few times. Does anybody here need an introduction to what Bhagavad Gita is? You all know what Bhagavad Gita is? Great. Great. Okay. So in Bhagavad Gita, material nature is governed by Maya, and Maya works through three modes of nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. Now, those of you who have been around for a while, you know all these things, but that's okay, I'll say it again anyways. Just like there's three primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, and you mix those three primary colors, you can get any color. For some years, I was living in New York City, and there's a paint store called Pinchicks, and you can take them chip a paint from your home or wherever you want, and they can make an exact, very expensive gallon of paint, because it's just based upon mixing colors, refractive index, exact. So it's just mixing the primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. Similarly, all variety of Maya has a combination of the three modes of material nature. And each of those modes have presiding deities, or they're in charge of this mode, that mode, the other mode. And they're pictured down below, in between her hands. Goodness in the center, that's Vishnu. To our left, that's Brahma, that's passion, he's the creator. And then the destroyer is over there on our right side, that's Lord Shiva. And they're in charge of those three modes. So Maya is working through those personalities, and those personalities are directing the modes according to different mixtures. And Maya is to see according to those modes and to experience happiness or suffering or combination. And the same object may be pleasing to one person and displeasing to another person. Like the saying, one man's food is another man's poison. You heard that one? Or, I grew up in America, so some of you that are from America, you know this one. Kids rhyming story. Some like it hot, some like it cold, some like it in the pot 3 days old. That's the mode of ignorance. There's modes of nature. Some like it this, some like it this. So, same thing, some people like, some people don't like. Some people like this and some people like that. And so all of that is the happiness and the distress is manifestation of Maya, or the influence of the modes of nature acting on us. It's not really what happiness is. It may look like it. And then somehow, just so happens that happiness somehow transforms and becomes distress. There's a nice verse amongst many in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says exactly what I just said. Yehi samsparsaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate. Krishna says, Yehi means one who, that person who, samsparsaja bhoga. Bhoga, well, those of you who've been around a while, you know what bhoga is. Bhoga is something before it's offered to Krishna. Mom cooks and she offers things to Krishna, right? No? You gotta offer your things to Krishna. Before you offer to Krishna, it has one name, bhoga. And then after you offer to Krishna, it has another name, prasadam. You heard that word? No? Oh, okay. I have to address myself to somebody who's been around a little bit longer. Your son? Yes? You know the difference between bhoga and prasadam?
No.
No. Would you like to learn? Yes. Once it's offered to Krishna, it's called prasadam. And before it's offered to Krishna, it's got another name. Same thing, but it's called bhoga. And what does bhoga mean? Bhoga means samsparshaja. Samsparshaja means ja. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar. I've just, heard Prabhupada for 50 years. So ja is a syllable that means takes birth. Ja. And samsparsha is senses contacting sense objects. Samsparsha. When senses contact objects of the senses with the mood of trying to be the enjoyer, bhoga, that's material life. We contact objects of the senses with the hope or expectation that there's going to be some enjoyment there. And when that happens, dukkha. I was expecting happiness, and instead I got dukkha. Those of you from India, you know what dukkha means, distress or suffering. So suffering arises from expecting happiness somewhere out there. I just have to configure it the right way so that my senses reach to some stuff that's out there, and it goes, wow, that was enjoyment. But something happens. When we're searching for happiness in that way, you may think that's what life is. Or this is another common phrase, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. So, it's not may die, but tomorrow, at some point, tomorrow or tomorrow's tomorrow, at some point we're going to die. So do as much of the enjoyment program as possible while you have the chance, because when it's over, it's over. And happiness is senses contacting sense objects. That's one way of searching for happiness. Here's a nice painting of a nice lady, and she has a fascination for her bird and the bird in the cage. And she spends more, when she spends, in this particular picture, illustration, she's spending so much time with the cage, she's not paying attention to the bird inside the cage. And poor bird, the bird croaks. So similarly, the purpose of the cage is for the bird. The purpose of the cage is not in and of itself. Similarly, the body, the covering of who we are, has a purpose. And we're meant to use it, engage it in different, according to our nature and ability and so on, to use it in some particular way. But that's not it. The purpose of the cage is for the bird. Protect the bird, and et cetera, et cetera. The body is meant as a vehicle to help us facilitate desire. But if those desires are in neglect of the animating force within the body, then all that's left is the expectation of happiness that turns into dukkha yonaya. Yoni, that verse, yoni means a place of birth. Like the place of birth of a child is the yoni of the mother. Dukkha yonaya evate. That the expectation of happiness is the place of birth of distress. Here's a nice verse. Some of you know a little bit what Bhagavad Gita is, and so that's the undergraduate study, and the graduate study is this one. It's Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is a verse that's spoken by Krishna to his cousin Uddhava, just to make it a little more colorful. What's the relationship between Krishna and Arjuna? Arjuna was the one who heard Krishna speak Bhagavad Gita. They're cousins. Because Krishna's father was Vasudeva, and Arjuna's mother was Kunti. And Kunti and Vasudeva were brother and sister, so they're cousins, first cousins. But Krishna's father also had a brother. And one of Vasudeva's brothers, his name was Devabhaga. Devabhaga had a son whose name was Uddhava. So Uddhava is Krishna's first cousin. So just as Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, so there's also an Uddhava Gita. Did you know that? It's many chapters in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's the graduate study. It's what's in Bhagavad Gita, graduate study level. So I just gave you a verse from Bhagavad Gita, half of a verse. Yehi samsparsha jabhoga, dukkha means distress, dukkha yonaya evate. Distress arises when you're expecting happiness by senses contacting objects, and there's going to be some happiness out there. Here's Krishna speaking to Uddhava. A conditioned soul undergoes great trouble to obtain a little happiness. After struggling in material life, which is full of hardship and hypocrisy, one may receive a little sense gratification. That's samsparsha ja. A little sense gratification, but this illusory pleasure in no way offsets the burden of suffering one must bear to obtain it. You know, the donkey and the carrot is the illustration. Donkey and the carrot. The donkey sees a carrot. The person's working with the donkey ties a stick to his back, and on the end of the stick is a carrot, and he's going with another step and another step to get the carrot, but the stick moves as he moves, so the carrot is always just out of his reach and out of his reach and out of his reach. And at the end of the day or whenever, the man that's having the donkey work, he takes the carrot off the stick and gives the carrot to the donkey, and that's it. He's got the carrot. So people are chasing carrots, or the expectation of happiness that's donkey-like, unnecessarily. And so that there's hardship and ordeal to get that. There's something that keeps people going. The buzz of the senses contacting sense object is something. But the sensation is fleeting, and it's not what real happiness is. It's something out there, when that something that appears to be happiness later transforms into distress. We'll see shortly. That's not what real this is the illusion pill. What the pursuit of happiness in this way. And supposing one gets a little happiness, then one wants more. And more and more and more and more. And greed is the tendency to want more and more and more. Whatever it is that one has, it's not sufficient. And so you all know, I'm sure everybody in the room here knows about ecological concerns of the consumption of the resources of planet Earth and our modern way of living. And the resources of Earth can't bear the consumption of the resources. There are different statistics, but if people continue to use the resources of the Earth planet at 2.5 times what the Earth planet has to bear, it's a problem. So one of the solutions to the problem is to go green and to recycle. Doesn't take care of the greed. It just, it dials it down a little bit, but it doesn't take care of greed. The diminishing of the Earth's resources. So how do you deal with greed? And because that's a byproduct of illusion, Maya. Enough, there's never enough. You want some, anyway, you know how it works. You have X, you want 2X. You get 2X, you want 4X. You get 4X, you want 8X. Just keeps growing. The point of satisfaction is never reached. Why? Because there isn't real happiness. Dushparena analena cha. That's Bhagavad Gita. Anala means fire. And greed, like lust, dushparena analena cha. It doesn't satisfy and it burns like fire. So going green is not sufficient. Good old Mother Earth needs a little help, and that's the help of higher consciousness or understanding what real happiness is. So here's another illustration. The illustration is meant to show like a forest, and down at the bottom you see a sword. This is from that same section of Uddhava Gita, where Krishna is continuing to explain to Uddhava the same principle, just expanding. The network of material desires is created when one falsely thinks that he can establish himself permanently in the material world. This binding network should be cut by the sword of detachment. That's that sword at the bottom. Otherwise, one will be forced to wander in the illusory network of Maya. There's the Maya word. Illusory network of Maya with no understanding of liberated life on the spiritual platform. So the sword of detachment doesn't mean I don't care. I mean, there's one kind of detachment. It's an artificial kind of detachment. It's not what spiritual detachment means. Spiritual detachment means you engage yourself in this temporary world knowing full well that it's temporary, and you're acting in a responsible, conscientious, moral, ethical way. I mean, just like when we were getting off the plane and the head, airline attendant said, and whatever you do, be kind to each other. Have a nice weekend, and it's supposed to be nice weather, and whatever you do, be kind to each other. So, detachment isn't just, it's more than just be kind to each other. That's the Buddhist principle. Detachment means you see things. Here's the spiritual conception. You see things in relation to the source of those things. And those things that have a source, which is everything, you engage those things in a relationship with the source of those things. So you're interacting with the world, but you're interacting in the world not with, I'm meant to be the enjoyer of these things. That's the detachment part. But there is someone who is meant to be the enjoyer of those things. That's a life of devotion. It's bhakti yoga. That's the kind of detachment. So cut with the sword of detachment, this idea, the binding network that says, this is a place that's meant for me to be an enjoyer. Cut that, and you use things that come into your senses contact with a different consciousness behind the activity. The activity stays the same. You still cook, but it's not just cook for yourself. It's you cook. That's cook for yourself. That's bhoga, and that brings distress or dukkha. You cook for the Supreme. You offer to the Supreme. Same idea. Look, Bhagavad Gita again, chapter 5. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, that's Arjuna. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. So that's, this pursuit of happiness, and wise people don't pursue happiness this way. So we're getting lots of no's. No, let's get to what the yeses are. One is happy. This is Prahlad Maharaj. This is Bhagavatam 7th Canto. As long as one does not endeavor for happiness, one is happy. As soon as one begins his activities for happiness, his conditions of distress begin. Oh. So just don't try to be happy. What do you try to do? You have to have a goal, you have to have a purpose of life. The purpose of life that this sword of detachment is, there's a higher purpose or higher consciousness. And that's what yoga is. Not just asanas, it's higher consciousness. Connecting your consciousness with the Supreme. That makes higher consciousness. By its nature, sense pleasure mandates renunciation of enjoyment. If we attempt to have a pleasure constantly, it becomes repulsive. That's it's the eating one, but you can take any of the other one of the senses, and how much can you do? And at a certain point, you're saturated. That's fire. So, never satisfies but burns like fire. Dushkarena analena cha. That's material senses contacting sense objects with the expectation that happiness is going to come. And one lives one's life that way, and something else happens. It burns like fire. In case you couldn't figure it out, that's death. At a certain point, death is at the door. And so the man inside is saying, when? And his wife is saying, he says we're out of any time minutes. It can happen any time, but now we're out of any time minutes. And it's going to happen. So the recommendation is not to live one's life in pursuit of illusory happiness that's fleeting, temporary, and insubstantial. So what's real happiness? There we go, spiritual happiness. Here's a nice triangle or pyramid. I like this diagram. It's a holistic picture of what real happiness is. Because the self is we're spiritual entities, and the spiritual entity that's at the center also has mind, intelligence, and a body. And you integrate them and bring well-being to each of them with spiritual well-being at the center. And it gives strength and vitality to the other parts of that triangle. That's the whole, so yoga, or the message of Bhagavad Gita, is it's a holistic picture. We don't just do spiritual and neglect the others. We do the others, but we don't just do the others and neglect the spiritual. we put one in the center, and that's the spiritual one. And that little skinny guy, that's us, that's the soul, and the soul is the animating force within the body, and it gives life and meaning and purpose to the intelligence, to the mind, and to the body, the functions of each one of them. That's, in this one illustration, that's what real happiness is, spiritual happiness. Can you hear? Recognize the tune? Here comes the sun. So that's another message of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5. A liberated person is not attached to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. Where the mind goes is dependent upon what you understand real happiness is. You know, leave the Buddhism message and go to the Vedic message. And real happiness is a relationship of love, but love that isn't mixed with the material temporality and the distress that goes with material things that come and go. The one story I like about George Harrison, there's many, but I read it and I found it interesting, so I'm sharing it with you. Sometime during his married life, a burglar broke into the house, and he and his wife were asleep upstairs, and he woke up hearing the burglar downstairs. So he went to the balcony, kind of looking over the edge of the staircase, and saw the burglar. And his instinct, two things: protect my wife, not necessarily protect the items of the house, because he has find another house, what to speak of the items of the house, but to protect his wife. And the second thing is, when he was seeking protection, this came out in a testimony in court because later they caught the robber. So he, at the top of his lungs, he began screaming the Hare Krishna mantra. Why? Because Krishna was his shelter. When the chips are down, where does your mind go? When there's danger, where does the mind go? George Harrison, his mind went to the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And he ran down, this is in testimony in court, he ran down the stairs and he approached the man with his bead bag in his hand, and the man had a knife, and the man tried to stab him, cut him a little bit, and saw he wasn't a pushover, although George Harrison isn't a Muslim man. He thought this man's crazy, and he ran out of the house. Later he was caught, brought to court. George Harrison described what I just described. To me, it says, this is where George Harrison's place of shelter was. So, let's see what happens with each one of us when the time of death comes, the anytime moment is over, and where's our consciousness? And where consciousness is depends on what you practice in your lifetime. Whatever you're attached to during your lifetime, that's where your consciousness is going to go at that moment. When everything else is taken from you, what you're attached to is where your consciousness is. That's where you're going to go. So, real happiness, unlimited happiness, is concentrating on the Supreme. And that's what yoga means, to bring the mind to that place, or the soul, the seat of consciousness, to that place. Here's another text from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6. We're almost done. The person in this higher consciousness sees the self by the pure mind and wants to relish and rejoice in the self. It's just cut and paste from the purport. No, from the verse. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Thus, established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there's no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken. No. What's suffering or distress? When suffering and distress comes and you're not shaken, that's what real happiness is. It doesn't mean that you don't feel when you stub your toe, it doesn't hurt or something. You feel what the feeling. But your consciousness, when it's fixed, doesn't depart from that higher consciousness place. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. So that's what spiritual happiness is, by definition. And this is our last slide. So one of our primary accesses to that higher consciousness is the sound vibration of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. When you were all assembled, as I walked in, you're all engaged in that same chanting. And it's side by side, I'll end with this, side by side with the mantra that you see pictured here. There's also hearing the message of Bhagavad Gita, because the message of Bhagavad Gita gives direction. The heart that's made clear or clean from scrubbing it and making the heart clean or consciousness clean, then what direction do you move in? Then the right direction to move in comes from the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, the principles by which one can live one's life. So both are needed. A heart that's pure and moving in the right direction with that pure heart. Supposing, you say the same thing in a different way. Supposing someone doesn't have knowledge, but they want purity, it's incomplete. Supposing someone has purity, one has knowledge but not purity, it's incomplete. Both are needed. So the end is, this is a recommendation for finding real happiness. It's embedded in Bhagavad Gita, and then you just practice it. Mantra, meditation, and the teachings that guide your life in the right direction. These are messages I wanted to share this evening. And it doesn't matter what one situation is. You can be an RIT student, or you can be whatever you are. And it's applicable for, all you have to do is be a spirit soul. That's pretty much everybody. And the bodies and the minds and the intellects are going to be different. The packaging is going to be different. And according to your nature, you do the packaging program that matches your nature. And at the same time, you attend to the consciousness that's within and move in the right direction with your life towards the pursuit of real happiness. Let's see if there's some discussion. Pretty simple. Not so complicated. The one thing, I've learned to be very patient, so I can just be very calm. And my experience is, once there's a question, then there's 5 questions. So I'm really patient. Yes?
So oftentimes when we are discussing about spirituality and pursuit of happiness, like there might be some people who are currently in a condition where they feel that they are very happy. how to convince them that this is temporary, this is not permanent. Because many people will tell that we will cross the bridge when it comes, like how to kind of convey this message to them.
Be very patient. I mean, there's three things come to mind. One is smile on the inside. Not like condescending smile, but be happy. And you model what real happiness is by being really happy. And although you or any one of us may be less than perfect, but with that confidence in what real happiness is, you're smiling, and you try to exemplify what that is. Second is, depending upon the person, you can, because I do this with young people a lot. From the young people, it's kind of, they're leading in the other direction. Low self-esteem and something, depression and something, stuff like that. But if I'm okay, you're okay, then you're blessed. You're very fortunate. And when you look around you, that is their autobiography. Do you see that there's distress in this world? Do you know anybody that's in distress in this world? Not your own autobiography. And then how does that happen? So take it out of the context of their feeling good about themselves, not to say they should feel bad about themselves, but to face reality. Is there suffering in this world? And then when there is suffering in this world, what's to be done about it? And when that bridge does come, then you're not feeling what you're feeling today, but someday in the future you're feeling a different way, you cross that bridge. What's the bridge? And where does it take you? No, depends on the person, but have them think more broadly about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And when that situation comes, what are you supposed to do with that situation? And is it unlikely to come? It's likely to come. Things are going well, and then the Ferris wheel goes up, and then it goes down, and then it may come back up again, and then it goes down. And you can just say, well, that's life. Okay, so there's acceptance that that's life. But why is that down thing there for you, for anybody? And what to do about it? Have you asked them? One of the things that I found works best with young people and people, ask lots of questions. You don't have to tell them. You get them to be thoughtful. So when they see that you mean it, you're not like trying to hammer them with, or hit them with a stick or something. You want them to become more thoughtful. They're more likely to go with you than if with a stick in your hand. So when you ask thought-provoking questions, and if they become a little thoughtful, then in that reflective place, then you might get them to think a little bit differently than when they were thinking 5 minutes ago. I said three things, and I was thinking there's something that's global. And since the beginning of time, there's lots of wars, there's lots of suffering, there's lots of abuse of the resource of nature and each other. And why is that? Okay, you're not doing like that. Why is that? And is it possible that to some degree, because we live in the world, we have inclinations like that, just by bad association? So what to do about that? What to do about the world and those tendencies within each one of us that lead to suffering? It's just a thoughtful provoking, thought-invoking kind of way of communicating. People are much easier to accept something if they've discovered it than if you're telling them.
Yes. Yeah.
Then you can sit down and read something from Bhagavad Gita. Say, tell me what you think of this.
Sure.
And at the end, let me have a copy. I'd like to look it over. Great. And if you have any questions, let's discuss, or whatever, depending upon the person.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you. My question is about the actual power of the Maha Mantra.
Ooh.
When you were explaining about how George Harrison used it, to me, that really speaks of just a perfect example of how powerful it actually is.
Yes.
Which is something that I'm starting to come into as a new believer to Krishna consciousness.
Okay.
Is I'm starting to realize that there is something to this. It's not just a bunch of words. So I guess my question is, can you speak to that? Can you speak to why? Why is it so powerful?
Well, the why is easier to speak about, and then experiencing it is it's a little more of a stretch. But the why, I'll give a scientific and give a spiritual answer. There's power in sound. Sound impacts matter. Sound is subtle, and sound impacts matter. There's many studies about sound impacting matter. You may know of some of them. There's someone gave me a little video. It's about, 60 seconds long. And the man sets up this table, sprinkles powder on the table, and then takes some instrument and moves the instrument along the table. And it makes a sound. One is kind of a scratching sound, another is another sound. And then the powder starts to form mandalas, geometric patterns. And then he takes another instrument and the powder starts bouncing around on the table, and it forms another geometric pattern that's very different. And then a third and then a fourth. And that's just one example. Sound effects matter. Vibration, sound vibration. And that's a material sound. So many others. Well, there's many others. So sound effects matter. And then what to speak of spiritual sound? Because spiritual sound doesn't just affect matter. Spiritual sound affects the soul or consciousness. Because the configurations of matter, that's in the material field. And then consciousness is not in the material field. Consciousness extends into the material field and can be conditioned by modes of nature and material nature. But material sound doesn't directly impact the soul, but spiritual sound does. And what does that spiritual sound do? Your question was why? Because it's spiritual sound. And it impacts consciousness. And it can impact consciousness in different degrees, in part having a lot to do with whether your receiver is on or not. The spiritual receiver is going to impact spiritually anyways, even if one receiver is kind of dull. That spiritual sound affects a tree, the soul that's within the tree. And they've done experiments with all of this, how sound affects plants that grow. and rock music does this, and classical music does that, and spiritual sound does something else. You know, over a period of time with scientific testing and blah, 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 sound affects consciousness one way or the other way, depending upon the modes of nature or transcendental sound. So consciousness is directly impacted. So the why is because the sound and the object, nama and nami in Sanskrit, the object and that which is representing the object by the name of the object are non-different, or the name of Krishna is non-different than Krishna. Abhinna tvam, abhinna means non-different, tvam means having the quality. Abhinna tvam, nama, name, and nami, no, the object named. That's spiritual sound. So it's not just the name, but that's also, you know, the Bhagavad Gita. It's Krishna speaking, and Krishna speaking is Krishna. It's not different. My speaking in some, you know, material sound is not the same. The word water and the object water are not the same. The name Krishna and the object Krishna are the same. So that's why, because they're non-different. And if one goes on, at least, you know, through time management in some part of your day, you do that meditation. You bring the mind to the sounds, to spiritual sound. It's going to impact the mind, and it's going to impact the soul. That's the science of it. That's the why. And then there's the subjective experience. I said the why is easier than, you know, what the experience of that reality. I'll take it one step further. To get the experience of that reality, it requires hearing with a spiritual ear. What does that mean? Here's what it means. There's this thing, that's the material ear. And then there's a subtle capacity for hearing that's different than this thing. Supposing this thing gets damaged, you can get another this thing. You can get another instrument because there's a subtle capacity to hear, subtle sense besides the physical sense. And then the spiritual hearing is the soul. So if you can hear with a spiritual ear, what happens is the sound goes into the chamber of the heart and the mind becomes stunned or still. The restlessness of the mind, which is moved by time and the material energy, past, present, future, time, you know, thinking about the future and worrying about, lamenting over the past. And mindfulness is part of the mantra meditation method. Momentariness, being in the moment, is part of mantra meditation, but it's sound. So when you hear with the spiritual ear, then the realization is the object is no different than the sound. Until then, it's conceptual. I'm feeling something, but not necessarily the reason behind that something. So the reason can be explained, the science of it can be explained. Then comes the application of the science. You go to the laboratory of life and you experiment with that teaching, hypothesis, and then the observation. To take some practice. That's yoga practice. Or practice of mantra meditation. And slowly, 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 slowly. The light comes, it's a dimmer switch. It's not a rocker arm switch. Slowly, slowly. Then you can start to see things you couldn't see before because the light's brighter. And you experience it from within. Your experience of life changes. The world around you doesn't necessarily change, but your experience changes. That's the subjective. This is something, you know, real, something very powerful. And this is what I'm experiencing. But you have to stay with it. You can't like sporadic. And it's, it's going to be less than a complete experience. But you get something. Then you can be a spiritual, a more spiritual person tomorrow than today. But then to become a fully realized person, it's you have to roll up your sleeves. It doesn't mean reject the world. It just means when you're doing your core spiritual activity, you're present. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Hey, look at this.
Hello. So, I have a question for you then.
I hope you do.
So, if it is true what you're saying, and I believe
Speak
it
right
is.
into the mic.
Okay.
Thanks.
If it is true what you're saying, and that reality is momentary, at least this one, correct?
Well,
Is there-
If you're a Buddhist, that's what you say.
And personally, I believe that as well, that at least this is momentary and I will die, and I'm not aware of whether or not there's something afterwards, right?
Yeah, if you're a Buddhist, that's correct.
So, for what reason do you have to pursue happiness instead of pleasure then?
Well, because you don't like suffering. If you're a Buddhist, there's a mission. And end of suffering, and come to the stage of enlightenment. That's at the other end. Over on this end is suffering. Over at that end is light or enlightenment. So that's the objective. If you're a Buddhist, what's that enlightenment? I described it. It's called nirvana. What does nirvana mean? It literally means cessation of material existence. So if you stop material existence, what's left? Nothing. Enlightenment. And that's reality if you're a Buddhist. But I'm not a Buddhist. I don't dislike Buddha or Buddha's teaching because it's limited. It dials down suffering for sure. But it doesn't dial up what real happiness is either. And if you dial up real happiness, then the suffering diminishes. So I'm not in favor of it. I just explained it, but I'm not an advocate of it. I'm an advocate of what real happiness is. Should I do the real happiness program again? When you got it. You're a good student, you're a good listener.
So a bit of what you're saying is confusing me, but I asked you for your reason as to why happiness matters over pleasure, though.
Why does happiness matter? Yeah, okay. That's like his question. It's an existential question. The reason happiness matters is because that's who we are. What do I mean by that? Okay. What's the soul? That's another way of saying, it's who we are. We're a soul. And the soul, you ready? The soul is part of the Supreme Soul. And the Supreme Soul is comprised of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And we're part of that Supreme Soul. So the spark is part of a big fire. And has qualities like the fire. So the big fire, that's Krishna, that's the Supreme. We're part of the Supreme. So why does happiness matter? Because it's who we are.
Thank you.
It's natural to us. And the other is not natural to us. That's why it matters. That's a thoughtful question. Thank you. Now what are you going to do with it? Find happiness. Find out who you are. And that happiness is part of who you are. Ananda is a Sanskrit word. Satchit Ananda. Someone else? Okay. What you gonna do? Okay, but let me do something else. She's gonna say something, make a little announcement, but I want to make a little announcement. I came here from Chicago. I'm here for 3 days, and they sent with me something that I'd like to do, some prasadam. I'm going to remind this young man. Something that when you offer to Krishna, this is to you. When you offer to Krishna, you say, Krishna, please accept. We made this for you, please accept. And Krishna very kindly accepts it. That's called prasadam, means mercy. So I'm going to distribute some prasadam. They sent with me some prasadam from Chicago, from the temple. And I'm going to walk around. You just put your right hand out. I'll put a little surprise in your hand. Prasadam. Okay. So now, you want to do your announcement?